The evening sky above Dry Creek turned golden as the last bit of sunlight slipped behind the dusty hills. The wind carried the smell of dry grass and the faint creak of old fences. It was a lonely little town, half forgotten by the rest of the world, where life was hard and every day felt like a quiet fight to survive. At the far end of the valley stood a small wooden cabin. Its roof was cracked, its porch sagging, and smoke from the kitchen chimney rose weakly into the sky. Inside, two young sisters were doing their best to care for their sick mother. The older one, Clara, had worry written across her face. The younger, June, only 15, tried to smile even though fear was in her heart. Their mother, Martha, lay in bed breathing weakly. Her face was pale and her lips dry. The doctor from town had already been there earlier that day, but his words offered no comfort. "She needs medicine from the next county," he had said, "and soon. Without it, she won't make it through the week." When he left, Clara felt her heart sink. The next county was 2 days' ride away and they didn't have a horse or a wagon. Their father had died years before, leaving them with nothing but a patch of land and a few old memories. The sisters worked day and night to keep their mother alive, but the fever grew worse. That night, as the wind howled softly outside, Clara went to the porch and sat on the old rocking chair. She looked at the sky full of stars and whispered, "If someone out there can help us, please send them soon." As if her prayer had traveled across the plains, a faint sound reached her ears, the slow rhythm of hooves against the dirt road. She looked up, squinting into the dim light. Out of the darkness came a lone rider. His hat was low over his eyes, his coat covered in dust, and his horse looked as tired as he did. The man stopped near their gate, his hand resting easily on the saddle. "Evening, ma'am," he said in a calm, deep voice. "Looks like you could use a hand." Clara hesitated for a moment. Strangers rarely came this far out, and when they did, it wasn't always for good reasons. But there was something in his voice, steady, kind, and honest. She nodded slowly. "Our mother is sick," she said softly. "Doctor says she needs medicine from the next county, but we can't get there." The cowboy's eyes softened. "How far?" 2 days' ride, Clara answered. He didn't ask any more questions. He just looked toward the cabin, then back at her. "I'll go." Clara blinked, unsure if she heard right. "You don't even know us, don't have to," he said simply. "Ain't right to see folks suffer when a man can help." Before she could reply, he turned his horse around and rode off into the growing night. The sound of his hooves faded into the distance until only the wind remained. Inside, June looked up from beside their mother. "Who was that, Clara?" "A cowboy," Clara said softly. "Just a cowboy." Hours passed. The storm clouds rolled in and rain began to fall. The sisters stayed awake, listening to the thunder and praying that the stranger would make it. Their mother murmured weakly, lost in fever dreams. Morning came. The sky was still gray and the air smelled of wet dust. The girls worked quietly, fetching water, cleaning their mother's forehead and trying to keep her comfortable. Every hour that passed felt heavier than the last. By noon, June's small hands trembled as she poured water into a cup. "What if he doesn't come back?" she whispered. Clara looked toward the road, her throat tight. "Then we'll still be grateful he tried." But deep down she couldn't stop hoping. The sun began to set again, painting the valley in orange and pink. The sisters were sitting beside their mother's bed when they heard it, that same steady sound of hooves. They both froze. Then June ran to the door. Through the dusty light, a horse appeared. Its rider leaned forward, holding onto the reins tightly. His clothes were soaked and blood stained one sleeve, but in his hand, he carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Medicine," he said simply when Clara ran outside. His voice was weak, but his eyes were steady. Clara's breath caught in her throat. "You came back." "Told you I would," he said with a faint smile. The cowboy, his name he said was Luke Tanner, handed her the medicine, then nearly fell from his horse. Clara and June helped him inside. His arm had a deep scrape and his hands were cold from the rain. They gave him a chair by the fire and wrapped his arm in cloth while he quietly told them what happened. He had ridden all night through the storm, crossing the flooded river to reach the county store. The bridge had broken halfway across and he'd nearly been thrown off his horse, but he didn't turn back. He rode until dawn, bought the medicine with the last of his money and came straight back without rest. Clara couldn't find words. She just looked at him, a stranger who had risked his life for 3 people he'd never met before yesterday. That night, Martha's fever finally began to break. Her breathing steadied and color slowly returned to her cheeks. June fell asleep by her bedside, holding her mother's hand. Clara sat near the fire, glancing at Luke, who dozed in the chair. The light from the flames danced on his face. He looked peaceful, though his clothes were torn and his hat sat lopsided beside him. There was something about him, a quiet strength, a kind of sadness, and a heart that didn't ask for anything in return. When morning came, the storm had passed. The sky was clear and bright again. Luke woke early, checked on Martha, and when he saw she was out of danger, he stood up and began to saddle his horse. Clara followed him outside. "You're leaving?" she asked softly. He nodded. "You don't need me now. Your ma will pull through." She looked at him, trying to find the right words. "You saved her life. We can never repay you." Luke smiled faintly and shook his head. "Didn't do it for pay. Just did what any decent man ought to." June came running out, still sleepy-eyed but smiling for the first time in days. "Mr. Luke!" "You can stay, can't you? We can make breakfast." He laughed quietly. "I'd like that, little miss, but I got miles to go." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Then at least let us thank you properly." Luke tipped his hat, the morning sun catching the edge of his worn brim. "Take care of your mother," he said. "That's all the thanks I need." And with that he mounted his horse. The sisters stood together, watching him ride down the dusty road until he was just a small shape against the bright horizon. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then June whispered, "Do you think we'll ever see him again?" Clara smiled faintly. "I don't know, but men like him don't just disappear. They live in the kind of stories that never fade." That night, after putting their mother to bed, Clara stepped outside again. The wind was calm, the stars brighter than ever. She thought about the cowboy, the way he had appeared from nowhere, the way he had helped without question, and the way he had left just as quietly. Something inside her changed that day. It wasn't just gratitude, it was a deep respect, the kind that stays forever. And even though the cowboy was gone, his kindness lingered in the air, like the scent of rain on the dry earth. Weeks passed after Luke Tanner rode away from the small cabin in Dry Creek. The land was slowly healing after the storm, and so was Martha. Her fever had gone, her strength returned, and she could finally step out into the sunlight again. The sisters, Clara and June, were happy to see their mother smile, but deep inside, they missed the quiet cowboy who had helped them when no one else did. Every evening, Clara would look at the road that disappeared beyond the hills, half expecting to see a lone rider coming back, but he never did. Life went on. The sisters planted vegetables, fixed fences, and worked together to keep the house running. The days were busy, yet the silence of the prairie often made Clara think about that single night when a stranger had risked everything for them. One morning, the town of Dry Creek woke up to new trouble. Word spread that a group of rough drifters had been seen near the edge of town. They weren't farmers or travelers, they were men looking for easy money. They took cattle, stole supplies, and frightened families who lived alone on the outskirts. Clara heard the news from the man who ran the small trading post. "They've been hitting ranches east of here," he said nervously. "Sheriff says they're headed our way next." That night, Clara and June sat by the window, worried. The wind was strong, rattling the shutters. "Do you think they'll come here?" June whispered. Clara nodded slowly. "Maybe. We have to be ready." But deep inside, she knew they weren't ready for anything like that. Their mother could barely walk without tiring, and the sisters had only an old shotgun left by their father, which hadn't fired in years. The next few days were tense. Smoke was seen rising from a ranch across the valley. The townsfolk gathered at the church to discuss what to do, but no one had a real plan. Fear spread like wildfire. And then, one afternoon, while Clara was hanging laundry behind the house, she heard it again, the steady sound of hooves. Her heart stopped for a moment. She turned and saw a figure riding through the dust. As he came closer, she recognized the same broad shoulders, the same old hat, and the calm, familiar face that had lived in her memory for weeks. It was Luke Tanner. He looked tired, but his eyes were as sharp and kind as ever. Clara dropped the basket and ran to meet him. "Luke, you came back." He smiled faintly. "Heard Dry Creek's in trouble. Figured I'd stop by before someone got hurt." June came running out, shouting his name with joy. Even Martha stepped onto the porch, tears glistening in her eyes. "Son, she said softly. "You're a sight for sore eyes." Luke nodded respectfully. "Good to see you standing, ma'am." He spent that evening listening to what had been happening. When Clara told him about the men threatening the town, his face grew serious. "Then we can't wait for them to come knocking," he said. "We need to get ready." The next morning, Luke rode into town to speak with the sheriff. The man was honest but outnumbered, with only a few deputies and little experience. Luke offered to help organize the townsfolk, and though the sheriff looked unsure, he agreed. By noon, Luke was walking through the dusty main street, calling on the blacksmith, the farmers, and the ranch hands. "We'll set up watch posts," he explained. "We'll light signal fires if we see anything. Everyone takes turns keeping guard." His calm leadership brought hope where fear had taken hold. Even the men who had been too scared to act before now felt courage returning. Luke worked tirelessly, repairing fences, checking weapons, teaching young men how to stay calm under pressure. Clara and June helped in every way they could. They cooked for the volunteers, patched old clothes, and brought water to those working in the heat. Every time Luke passed by, Clara felt something in her chest tighten, a mix of admiration and gratitude. One night, while they were sitting by the fire, June asked him shyly, "Luke, why do you help people you barely know?" He looked into the flames for a long time before answering. "Because once someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. I figure it's my turn to do the same." His words stayed with Clara. She could see in his eyes that there was pain in his past, something he didn't talk about, but also a quiet peace that came from doing what was right. Days turned into weeks. The people of Dry Creek grew stronger, more united. The drifters who had been terrorizing nearby towns finally reached the edge of the valley, but they found Dry Creek prepared. Signal fires burned on the hills, and men stood watch in shifts through the night. Seeing that the town wouldn't be an easy target, the drifters turned away. When the danger finally passed, the whole town gathered outside the church. The sheriff thanked everyone, but most eyes turned toward Luke Tanner. He just tipped his hat, embarrassed by the attention. "I just did what anyone else would have done," he said. That night back at the cabin, the sisters made a small dinner for him. The air was calm, the stars bright above. They sat outside by the well, plates balanced on their knees. "You saved our town," June said proudly. Luke chuckled. "I didn't save it. You all did. Took everyone working together." Clara looked at him quietly, her voice soft. "You gave people courage, Luke. That's something they didn't have before." He didn't reply right away. He just smiled and looked out at the horizon. Sometimes all folks need is someone to believe they can stand their ground. When the night grew colder, Martha went inside, and June soon followed, leaving Clara and Luke alone under the stars. The silence between them was gentle, filled with things that didn't need to be said. Finally, Clara spoke. "You didn't have to come back. You could have kept going." Luke turned to her. "I thought about it, but something told me I wasn't done here." Clara smiled softly. "We prayed you'd come back, you know. Every night." He lowered his head slightly, almost shy. "Guess your prayers travel far." For a while they just sat there listening to the crickets and the whisper of the wind. Then Clara said, "You'll always have a place here, Luke. You're part of this family now. You don't have to keep drifting." Luke didn't answer right away. He looked up at the sky, then at her. "Maybe one day," he said finally. "But for now, there are still roads to ride. Folks out there need help just like you did." Clara felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from gratitude, deep and honest. "Then promise me one thing," she said softly. "Promise you'll come back when you can." He nodded. "You got my word." The next morning, as the sun rose over Dry Creek, Luke Tanner saddled his horse once again. Martha hugged him and thanked him like a mother would her own son. June handed him a small cloth bag filled with biscuits for the road. Clara stood quietly by the gate, her eyes full of emotion. Luke mounted his horse and looked at them one last time. "Take care of each other," he said. "We will," Clara replied. "And you take care of yourself." He smiled, tipped his hat, and turned his horse toward the open plains. The sisters watched as he rode off into the sunrise, his figure growing smaller until it vanished beyond the hills. For a long time after that, life in Dry Creek was peaceful. The town grew stronger, and the people often spoke about the cowboy who came out of nowhere and changed everything. Clara never stopped thinking about him. Sometimes, when the wind blew softly through the valley, she thought she could almost hear the distant sound of his horse. And though the road was long and the world wide, She believed one day he would return, because some promises like true kindness never fade away.